There we go. There we go. Thanks, David. That looks great. Okay, so today's agenda, as I said, we're going to explore two relationships. David and I both like dogs, and so you're going to see a lot of dog slides on our webinars. And I looked at this slide and thought, boy, this is kind of like the way it should be with in a church and a school. We're very similar. We have similar missions. We don't always think alike, but we definitely have it. Both the board and the vestry and the rector and the head have important relationships that they have to model. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, and we're going to talk about those relationships. I want to talk about, first of all, just the National Association of Episcopal Schools offers us principles for good practice on all kinds of topics. And so I went on the NAES website to get the principles of good practice for governance. And these are 4 things that I think are super important for us to consider when we think about the church and the school relationship. And I do want you to know that some of the slides that we have today are kind of text heavy. And the reason I did that is because later you may want to use these in your handouts. You maybe want to study them a little bit more. I'm not going to read them to you, but I'm going to kind of review them. So from NAES Principles of Good Practice for Governance, we have 4 main things that need to be thought about. The first is that the parish, as a parish, the parish views the school as a significant outreach program to the community. In our best relationships that we have seen, that is the way that the parish views the school. It views the school as an outreach and almost as a child, and that's how the parish views the school. Number 2, that the school board membership includes a sufficient number of parishioners, that there's parishioner representation on a board, and the purpose of that is to sustain the school's Episcopal identity. This absolutely matters to a church, that the school continues with its Episcopal identity and that Episcopal identity is strong. It matters to SAES, and it matters to the whole community. So having board membership that includes representation of the parish really is helpful. That's usually found in the bylaws of a school, and it varies from school to school. Some schools have a little bit more, some schools have a little bit less, but most schools that we see have about 50% representation. And that should be a high priority. Number 3, the church and the school leadership are both professional, and they exercise their ministry as a collegial partnership. This is shared ministry that we do, and it does matter. And we're not 2 individuals walking beside each other. Again, I use Bishop Reed is the one that actually taught me about the idea of us being a marriage. And we work together. We don't work alongside each other. So, and then lastly, that the responsibility of the Episcopal identity of the school rests upon the shoulders of every member of the leadership team. Episcopal identity is the priority for a parish that has a school. So we're going to go to the next slide, and we're going to talk a little bit about a parochial school governance and what that looks like. Who are the players? How do they interact? I love this slide because it really represents kind of how we're all connected. So as you can see, the diocese is at the top with the bishop, and if there is an Episcopal Schools Commission, our diocese and the Diocese of West Texas, we do have a commission. And I know the Diocese of Texas does as well. That's where those those players fit in. Underneath the diocese, you have the parish, and the parish is responsible. The vestry is responsible for calling the rector. Then underneath the parish, the school board. The school board is empowered by the vestry to be the governing body of the school. Underneath that is the head of school. The school board has 1 employee, the head of school, and underneath that is all employees, and all employees report to the head of school. Now, what I want you to note on that are where there are not direct connections. So, for example, the parish is not directly connected to the head of school. So it would be out of the lane of the vestry to be doing anything relative to the head of the school. The vestry doesn't hire the head of school or evaluate the head of school. That's the job of the board. And so you can see that those are not connected, and that's why. The same with the school board. The school board is not connected to the employees. And so they don't really, they don't hire employees, they don't evaluate employees. So the connections are, in this slide, are really important to describe the parochial school governance and how it should work. It's really important as you look at this. This is helpful to educate the vestry and the board on as you walk through what are our jobs, what are our lanes, what are our roles. So let's go to the next slide. So we have one shared mission, as you can see from kind of what we've been talking about. There's one shared mission, but two very different perspectives. And this slide kind of represents how we share the mission, but we've got different lanes that we're in. And I do want to say this, that as we walk along, if you have questions, David, can you see the question and answer box?
I can, and one just came through. Let's talk about this a little bit. One participant asked, what is the rector's role or direct supervision? So I'm not sure exactly if he's asking about the head of school specifically or staff, but how would you respond to that? The rector's role on direct supervision of staff that's employed by the school.
Well, the rector doesn't really directly supervise in any staff at the school, including the head of school. Really, it's the board, the rector, and at least, okay. So again, it's going to be different in a diocese that has a little bit different structure in terms of what the rector is able to do under the canons. In the Diocese of West Texas, for example, the rector is a part of the board. The rector does not have authority to hire and fire or individually a head of school. He does play a part on the board, and he does have the ability to be a part of that. There's not a direct supervisory role between the rector. From an SAES perspective, especially, there's not a direct supervisory role between the rector and the head of school or any staff on the school side. Does that make sense?
I think that's right. I think that's right. And so what I would look at it as a partnership between the head and the rector.
Right.
Which then of course begs the question, well, okay, let's play out this scenario. Let's say you're the rector and you've got some concerns about how the head of school is performing his or her job. The correct approach for that would be to make sure that information goes to the head support and evaluation, which is a committee of the board, who is tasked with giving feedback to the head of school. So if you're in a Diocese of Texas, for example, where the rector is by canon the chair of the board, unless the rector has delegated that, then if there's concerns about the head of school's job, then you're a member of the board, and that's the best way to address that. It's not so much you're the direct supervisor, because the board is the employer of the head of school, not the rector. But that's a legitimate question to ask if you're a rector and you've got concerns about either the school operation or concerns about whether or not the head of school is living up to his or her responsibility. Where does that go? And the correct place for that to go is into the board's evaluation process of the head of school.
Well, and that's correct. And even further, the question of, well, does the rector serve on the head support and evaluation committee? And I can tell you that in my situation at St. Albans, the rector did serve on that committee. And I wanted the rector on that committee. And I don't know your thoughts on best practice, how that is in other places, but I feel like that one of the things that the rector offers in a situation like that is that he or she is there at the school on a daily basis and can offer insight. Not only offers support to the head, which is something we're going to talk about later, but can also offer insight that people that are board members are not there every day to be able to see.
Right.
So is it best practice for the rector to be on the head support and evaluation committee? I don't know. It was the case at St. Albans.
I think, I don't know if I can say it's best practice or not, but in a parochial situation, yeah, I would like the rector to serve on the head support and evaluation committee just because of the pastoral role that the rector has. So all things equal, I would love for that to happen. I think sometimes the realities of running a parish prevent that from happening, but all things equal, yes. If you are a rector of a school board that does not have a head support and evaluation committee, or if you're the rector of a school and the head evaluation process is unclear or muddled, I would suggest that you sign up for our webinar on the SAES vital signs later on this month, because that's a vital sign for our schools, is that there's a strong and clear process for head of school evaluation. And we're going to talk more about what that looks like at that webinar. So if this is the first time you've heard about a head support and evaluation process, or as a rector, if you're unclear what the evaluation process is for the head of school, then I would suggest you learn more about head of school evaluation at our webinar on vital signs.
Right.
Or okay, email me, email any of us as well. You can always do that.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, before we can know what our jobs are, we need to know kind of what our roles are. And when it comes to church and school, we have the same mission, but we express them differently. And it's absolutely critical, I think, for the parish and the school to understand their partner. And so this is a great slide that kind of talks about the differences between a parish and a school and how those differences could potentially cause friction. So as you can see, you know, a couple of the things that really stood out to me about this slide was just the fact that in a parish, we're all 100% Episcopalian. That's why we go to church at that particular parish, is because we're Episcopalian, versus a school. The school is almost always a large percentage non-Episcopalian. And even if there's quite a few people that go to the church from that and the school's primarily not Episcopalian and may or may not even see the same, see things differently from an Episcopal. They may be different faiths, they may be unchurched. So those are two very different perspectives of the constituencies. Another thing that can create friction or can be different is just the fact that the parish is really under church authority, under authority by the canon. The school is too, but it also has other authorities that, or things that they have to be the people that they have to be responsible to. They have to be responsible to their accrediting agency. They have to be responsible to sometimes to the state if they are licensed by the state. So that can create differences of ideas if the parish wants to do something that maybe the school can't do because of certain people that they are, think about shared space. If you're sharing a nursery and you're doing in the nursery, the church uses the nursery on the weekends and the school uses it during the week. There are certain requirements that the state's going to have for a nursery that the church isn't going to have. So that can be a challenge, and it's an example of how we express our missions differently. The last example that I think is really important is the fiscal years. Most schools are on a school year, fiscal year, and most churches are January to December. So at St. Albans, we would run into this routinely, where we would have maybe an expense that we both wanted to share and had planned on sharing, but when we spent that money was up for debate, because usually we were pretty cash, pretty awesome in cash in beginning of the year, and by December we were beginning to run a little bit lower. Versus the parish, they have a little bit more cash at other times of the year, and so the question can be: do we want to spend money now? Do we want to spend money? If I have to spend money, if I need to do it, I'd rather do it in the summer, and the church may rather do it in a different time. So those are the things that can begin to create friction that we have to look at, and we have to acknowledge that we just have different views. So let's go to
just kind of question, Mary Catherine. I think this is a really good question. The question is, do you know of any churches that change their fiscal year to match the school? I don't think churches are allowed to do that. So I think I don't have the canons in front of me, but I think churches by canon are required to be January to December, I believe. Double check that, but yeah, it's not. We don't see very often churches moving from a calendar year to a school year, and I think the reason for that is that the canons won't allow it.
I agree with that. I don't know of any church that's ever done that. Okay, so let's go to let's talk a little bit about roles and responsibilities. And again, I'm not going to read this to you, but there are a few things that I want to cover that I do think are important. And before we talk about roles and responsibilities, I want to talk to you about, when you are beginning to understand your roles and responsibilities, you want to base those on 3 principles. And these are principles that SAES came up with that it's really important for both constituencies to consider these 3 principles before we get down to tactical roles and responsibilities. The first one is just the heartfelt appreciation for the fact that most SAES schools would not be in existence today had it not been for their parishes. The parish started the school. I mean, at St. Albans, we started in 1948, and the parish chose to do that. And there's a rich tradition of Episcopal education that matters, and it matters to the parishes, and our schools need to be cognizant of that. And I just think that's really an important topic. On the flip side, the parish needs to give functional independence to the school, and that means that yes, we created the school, but at the end of the day, we're going to empower a board, and that board must have functional independence. It must be able to run the school and hire the head of school and be strategic and make those decisions, understanding that it is responsible to the sponsoring parish to preserve the Episcopal identity. That matters really a lot. And then again, finally, an understanding that rectors and vestries have an appropriate interest in making sure that the Episcopal identity of the school is always intact, and that it's valued. So given those 3 principles, let's talk specifically about so we're going to talk about roles and responsibilities of kind of the vestry and rector, and then of the board and the head. And really on this slide, in terms of the vestry and the rector, the big picture is that the vestry and rector are responsible for making sure that Episcopal identity is intact. It's really critical that the vestry understand the history, the bylaws, the strategic plans of the school, that they empower the board to do the day-to-day stuff. The maintaining of positive relationships is really critical, and the vestry and the rector need to ensure that that's taking place. I like this one, understanding the nature of school families. Just making sure that that they understand that slide that we talked about the differences. Parishioners and school families are different. They have different needs. They have different values. And I think it's really critical that the vestry and the rector understand that. Assuring that the vestry have an orientation where they're educated about the nature of the school is a really good thing to do. Sometimes that doesn't happen. And I would say that rectors have that they really need to ensure that their vestry has been oriented about the school. It would be very hard to have a great relationship between a church and school when you ask a vestry member about their school and they say, I don't really know anything about the school. So that's really important. And insisting on financial transparency is critical. The vestry needs to, and the rector need to insist that there's financial transparency between the school and the parish. And just, again, you can see that the roles and responsibilities of the vestry and the rector are to just insist on communication and making sure that Episcopal identity is intact. It's all big picture stuff. It's 50,000 feet up in the air. It's not down in the weeds worrying about, kind of where we hang backpacks or whether, it's really strategic, and it's really empowering the board to get their stuff done. Hey, I think we lost, just so you know, David, I think we lost Rod somehow. So Rod Clark, one of our participants. So I don't know if he can get back on or not, but okay. So let's talk now about the roles and responsibilities of the board and the head. So this is a lot of work, a lot of words, and so I'm not going to read them to you, but I want you to see that it's kind of the flip side of the same coin. While the vestry and the rector have their kind of roles and responsibilities of what they need to be doing, the board and the head, their job is to be the primary keeper of the school's mission, to set vision. They hire and fire the head of school, but they are also responsible for recruiting and electing trustees. With the exception of the vestry reps, they have the fiduciary responsibility of the school. But again, they also ensure that new board members understand the school's relationship with the parish. That is critical. So new board members, just like vestry members, need to be onboarded and taught about the school. Board members need to be onboarded and taught about the church. They need to know the history of the church. They need to know the diocesan canons. What are the strategic goals of the parish? Wow, that goes a long way when it comes to good church-school relationship. Ensure that the board members understand the details of any shared property, anything that we're doing together, the board needs to understand. Maintaining positive relationships means that the head makes regular reports to the vestry, and that's critical. And then empowering the head of school to oversee, again, the board and the head of school run the school. The vestry and the rector plays a part in that, but the vestry really empowers the board to do that. Do we have questions? I want to stop and make sure if anybody has questions about that. It's a lot, so we want to make sure that you have it and you could study it and come back to us.
I think we're good. And again, participants, make sure as questions pop up, use that Q&A box, and we'll make sure to stop the presentation and get those questions answered. We're going to have time for Q&A at the end as well.
Great. Let's see. I think have you lost? Am I still there?
You are.
Okay. I'm like, just a minute. Sorry, guys. I've lost I can't see my slides, but I'm going to go ahead and go for my paper because for some reason the slides are gone.
So it's the best practices for vestry and board relationship slide.
Okay, well then let's talk about best practices then. So there's 4 basic best practices that I think are really important for you to consider when talking about the vestry and the board getting along and getting to know each other. The first one is training. Again, I touched on this earlier, but training the vestry about the board and the role of the board, and training the board about the vestry and the role of the vestry. Ensuring that they receive annual training and onboarding for new members, that's critical. Educating, spending time understanding each other, understanding their goals and their vision, their strategic plans. I think another really fun one and an important one that doesn't get done a lot is gathering. And one of the things we talk about all the time is that the vestry and the board together should gather together at least once a year. It's to get to know each other, to spend time together, to celebrate their wins for the year. That's something that can really build relationship and community. And I think that it needs to be done on the regular. And finally, a shared use agreement. That not only is a shared use agreement a standard of SAES, it's just good practice. It's writing down what it is that we believe, who we are as a community, and how are we going to do things? How are we going to communicate? How are we going to share space? How are we going to pay expenses? All of that. That's a critical component of a good relationship. So let's talk.
Catherine, are you able to see the slides?
I'm not able to see the slides, but I've got a piece of paper, so
This is the first of many times where I'm able to say, Mary Catherine, it's you.
All right. Are you able
to check with everyone, and everyone seems to be able to see the slides. So If you're not able to see them, why don't we just keep moving and I'll
Okay.
manage the slides. Let me stop though, because we do have a really good question.
Okay.
Are there areas where the vestry needs to approve school board plans, decisions, etc., involving expansion, capital campaign, and land acquisition?
Absolutely, yes, there are.
Yeah.
And of course, some of this depends on, there's some specifically some of that depends on the canons where you are. But I would just say that in general, the vestry does need to, first of all, the vestry needs to approve the budget every year. We send, I mean, at least in our diocese, we send the budget to the vestry every single year for just to let them see it, and they approve it. Major bylaws changes, even little bylaws changes at St. Albans, the vestry approved. The Diocese of West Texas requires any land, any kind of acquisitions or anything like that, it even has to go to the diocese. So those are the kinds of big things. Capital campaigns, those are big. And yeah, I think that the vestry needs to be really in the know about that. David, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think so. So I think it's a little different from diocese to diocese, but things like land acquisition, these major type questions in a parochial environment, absolutely. But I would say double check your canon. About half of the dioceses we work with have a specific school canon that outlines those kind of expectations. If you're in a diocese where the canon doesn't outline that, then feel free to pick up the phone and give us a call, or call the diocese as well for some guidance. But yeah, those kinds of major decisions do tend to be done in concert between board and parish. Now, the question asked about board plans. So let's talk about a strategic plan. I don't know if a strategic plan of a school needs to necessarily be approved by a vestry, but I think there does need to be partnership in how that plan is written.
Right.
So that, depending on the decision, it may be a little bit different, but the kinds of questions or the kinds of issues you listed in your question, yeah, those tend to be situations where they need to be made, those decisions need to be made in concert between board and vestry. Here's another question. Does the school faculty have a role to play in relationship building? What's your thought on that? What's the role of the faculty in all of this?
Well, I think, yeah, and we're going to touch on this a little bit when we get to the rector slide, but yeah, I think that the school faculty, absolutely, all constituencies play a role in church-school relationship. All of them do, and building that relationship. And I mean, it's not going to be as evident as the church and as the rector and the head, or the senior warden and the board chair. But yeah, I think that there's definitely faculty participation in building that church and school relationship.
Yeah, I don't think it's realistic to assume that the majority of your faculty will be Episcopalian. I don't think it's realistic to assume the majority of the faculty will attend your parish on Sunday. The expectation I had for faculty was, if you're going to be part of the team here, you need to support the Episcopal ethos and the fact that we're a parochial school. Right. That means, for us, it's different in every environment. For us, that meant, one way we saw that was we all came together for chapel. Regardless of your personal religious background, regardless of your spiritual practice, this community comes together for chapel. Chapel is not planning time. Chapel is not time to catch up on your email. And that's the expectation that we have. So that's an example of how faculty can play a role in recognizing that special church-parish relationship.
Right. I agree. Okay, let's go to the slide about shared use agreements. And I've just got a few topics that I want to make sure that you consider when you're building a shared use agreement. Number one, if you do not have a shared use agreement, it's absolutely critical that would be one of my first things that I did as a rector. If there's not such a document, that you begin that process and that you sit down with the head of school and the junior warden or the senior warden. In our environment, it was the senior warden and the board chair, and that you start to put together a document. And in that document, there's about 8 things that I think you should consider. Number one, you need to be, we began ours with a covenant that described the relationship that we wanted the church and school to have. And part of the reason we did that is we wanted anyone coming, any new priest, any new head of school that came along later in after I was gone or the priest was gone, we wanted them to know what the church and school relationship looked like and what this community expected out of the priest and the head of school. And so we built a covenant, and it's a great covenant, and I love it. And so I think everybody should kind of create a document that has that. Other things to consider: shared costs such as utilities and insurance. If you have a shared employee, repairs and maintenance splits. How are we going to do major maintenance? What are we going to do about improvements to the property? Who's going to replace the air conditioner that went out in the gym? Capital campaigns and other joint fundraisers, and then other procedures for using shared space. If the school wants to use the church lounge for something, how are we going to go? What is the procedure for going about asking for that space? So we could probably do a whole webinar on a shared use agreement, but these are some things that you might think about if you have not do not have one, or if you have one that you're working on. And one other thing that I would say too, back to the question of the vestry approving school plans, I did want to say one thing about that. So yes, big picture school plans, yes, things that affect Episcopal identity or whatever. Does the vestry need to approve the addition of a section in second grade? No, that's not, that's a in the weeds kind of day-to-day operations decision that's not really in the lane of the vestry. So I think it's really important to discern that and to decide what are things that, and what would be perfect, obviously, is if the canons all said this is exactly what vestry approves and what it doesn't, but it's not a realistic world. So just really critical that you understand that role and what's approvable and not, what you should be approving, what you shouldn't. So, but a shared should be.
Let me stop you. Would you be comfortable sharing a copy of that shared use agreement? We're having some requests for that.
Of course.
Yeah. So what for everyone, if you're in a place that doesn't have one or you just want to see what one looks like, what I'll do is I'll add a sample to the recording link and to the slides that you're going to get. I'll send that out. It'll be a day or two, but I'll package all that up and send that out to all the people who register for the webinar.
Yeah, that sounds great. So, okay, so we're on our, I chose this slide with the collaboration, trust, and communication. I chose that particular dog because he looks surprised, and that's what we do not want, is we do not want surprises. If you commit to a no surprises model in your community that supports and enables each other to be united together, you will do well. And that was one of the things that we always tried to commit to at St. Albans, is just no surprises, be communicative, let people know what's happening, whether it's the rector or the head of school. No surprises is really the key that helps churches and schools get along. So let's go to the next slide. And one of the reasons I like this slide is because I want to just touch on one part of conflict. The reality is that conflict it's inevitable. We are communities of churches and schools of broken people that are going to make mistakes and going to forget to communicate. And we're going to have bad days, and we're going to get into conflict. And that's just a reality. But for me, the number one most important thing that rectors and vestries and boards and heads need to remember is that they are the model of leadership for their community. And when these disagreements do occur, it is critical that the leaders of the church and school community behave in an exemplary way, and that they model how we're going to get along with each other, how we're going to treat each other. Truthfully, it's even more important from the head of school and the rector's standpoint, because they're the everyday, day-to-day leaders of the community. But when everybody in the leadership is behaving well and treating each other with respect, then parishioners and school families and faculty and all of those people, they're going to follow. So we want to be sure that we're practicing exemplary behavior. Questions about any of that before we go to the rector and head relationship?
I think we're good.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about the rector and the head relationship. And so are we at the slide with the rector's role in the school?
Correct.
Okay. All right, so one of the things that I want to begin with is a story about when my second rector, Scott Brown, came to St. Albans. The first time I ever met him, he sat down with me and he talked to me about his view of his job and about what he hoped to accomplish as the rector of the school. And one of the things that he did that really was great for me is that he just said to me, look, we're a partner. We're a partnership here, and I will never triangulate you. I will never listen to, I will never gossip or get involved in things that I'm not supposed to be involved in. I will always support you. We may disagree behind closed doors, which we did on the regular, because that's where people, but as a team, he said, I will not gossip about you. I will come to you about things that you need to know about. And that really put me at ease. So what I want to begin with the rector's role is just to say that it's really critical that the rector understand how powerful a part he plays in the life of the head of school, and the whole school in general. The engagement of the rector in the life of the school is 100% the thing that's going to make a great relationship. If the rector's engaged in the school, it's going to be fine. If the rector is not engaged in the school, there's likely to be a problem. And so what do I mean by engagement? What I mean is that the rector has regular visits to the school. He's in the school. He's walking around. He knows the teachers. He knows the kids. And I say he, it could be a she, forgive me. They know what is happening in the school, and they know the people. They know the families. That is so important, that they're cultivating relationships with the faculty and staff. Every rector that I have had, with maybe one exception, has been like that. Has assistant rectors as well, associate rectors, engaging in the life of the school and in the community that comes to school every day. And another thing that does is that really is helpful when there are crises in the school, when there are things happening in the school that are hard. The rector's engagement and the relationships that he or she has built is going to make it a lot easier. Engaging with the board and making sure that they're an active member of the board is also another way of engaging in the life of the school that matters. I think that really does matter. I think it occasionally, there were times that I had rectors that I knew they'd had a long day and the board meeting was not an important one, and that we weren't doing anything that really needed his or her attention. And so I said, you go home. You don't need to stay here. But most of the time, my rectors were at every finance meeting. They were at every board meeting. Now, again, that's St. Albans. It may be that's not a possibility, but the engagement in the life of the school, whether it's the board or the day-to-day life, is really important. Representing the school to the larger community. Harlingen's not a big community, and all of our rectors have done that. They've been active in the life of the community, and that helps the marketing of the school, and it really just helps in general build the relationship. The rector is the spiritual leader of the community. Our diocesan canons talk about the rector overseeing the spiritual life and the spiritual direction of the school, and that's what our rectors did. They helped. I usually helped, but they helped kind of plan out the chapel themes and made sure that the chapel themes were what they wanted. And yeah, I mean, I did a lot of chapel, but our rectors did too. So that's the spirituality of the community is a big role. And then finally, I think it's critical again to talk about the fact that as a head of school, the priest plays a huge part in the life of the head of school. And it's it's a lonely job, and it's there's not very many people that the head of school can be themselves with and can talk about the things that are hard. And if you can play that role to your head of school, it will be huge. And I know for me, I just felt like I had 17 years of the best directors on the planet, and that's what they always did for me. They knew what I was doing every day and how hard it was, and they checked on me, and they cared about me, and they prayed for me, and that matters. So, questions about that?
Great question. Here's one. I'm new to the parish and school. It seems so much easier to learn the names of parish members through the church directory and name tags than students or teachers at the school without those helps. And it seems overwhelming that there are 135 students and families. What best practices can help a new rector get to know so many folks when there isn't daily interaction? So the first thing that comes to mind for me is being physically present at the school. I think that's a big piece of the battle. Walking the halls, getting to know faculty, doing chapel will just through doing it over and over again, you'll learn the kids. You'll learn the names of the kids. And that would be my biggest piece of advice, would just be physically present as much as possible. It's probably easier with the faculty in some ways because there's, appropriate gatherings, faculty gatherings where you can show up and participate. With the kids, it's just a matter of physically being there. I always taught because that was when I was a school administrator. I also made sure I always taught because that was another great way to meet the kids and develop a relationship with the kids. That may or may not be practical for a rector, but if you're in a school that uses godly play or uses different kinds of religious instruction, if you can arrange your schedule such to teach occasionally, that helps as well. There's generally not a photo directory. And unfortunately, name tags. Well, some of the schools, faculty will wear name tags, but it's not like a lot of parishes where name tags are pretty much, required wearing. So the biggest piece of advice I would have is physically be there as much as you possibly can and develop relationships. And Kay, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to say that's exactly spot on. I think that, for St. Albans, which is my only experience, every priest I had spent a significant time. I have priests that would just they would just get up from their office and they would go down and just walk the halls and walk into classrooms. And most of our priests did chapel at least once or twice a week. We had my priests all helped with in-services and, did the beginning of the school chapels and for the faculty. And so all of the things that David said are ways to do it. And don't expect it to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen overnight, but as you spend time in the school, as you engage, it will matter and you will begin to know the kids. And that's easier for kids. All three of our priests over the 17 years I was at St. Albans had kids in the school, which did help. I can see how it would be a little bit more challenging if you don't have kids at the school. But again, the idea that you're engaged in all aspects of the school, you will eventually get to know them. But it's a great question.
Time. Yeah. And names remembering names, that's something that does not come easy to me. I had to really, really work at that. And so give yourself time and just be as intentional as you can about that. And then Rod just threw out a really good suggestion. He's exactly right. Schools may not have a photo directory, but most schools still do some type of yearbook.
Yes.
And so that right. At least with the kids and the faculty, you've got that as a tool as well. And I do remember on multiple occasions using the yearbook to help jog memory about making sure I knew the right faces with the right name. So if your school does some type of yearbook, then that's a great tool to use as well.
Great question. Okay, let's talk about the head of school's role in the church. And we don't have any heads, I don't think, on this webinar, but I think it's good
I think we have a couple actually.
Oh, do we? Okay, good. Well, I think it's always good for everyone to know kind of the opposite side of the coin. And not every head of school is Episcopalian. I happen to be Episcopalian and a member of St. Albans Church, but and that does make it easier to engage in the life of the church. But if you're not, you can still engage in the life of the church, and that's really critical. One critical component that I think the parishioners really value, someone who is engaged in the life of the church and knows what's going on at the church. Attendance at the annual parish meeting, significant church events, things that you can do to continually bring the school in front of the church is great. Again, representing the church to the school community. We're one body. At St. Albans, we considered ourselves one body, many parts. And we shared space, we may have shared different ways of expressing the mission, but we still were representing each other to the community. Working with the rector to ensure that the spiritual objectives are achieved. I think that the head of school has an obligation. I think that the head of school has an obligation to be a part of the spiritual side of the school. I don't think that the head of school can just go, well, that's not my department. Working with the rector, understanding what the spiritual goals that he or she is setting forth for the school is important. And then again, communication, regularly communicating to the parish about the health of the school, the needs of the school, any plans. Again, communication is key. Attendance at vestry meetings to communicate, yearly or bi-yearly communication to the parish. All of that really does matter, and those are critical components of the head as they engage with the church. So let's go to the next slide, which is some best practices for cultivating good relationships between the rector and the head. Okay, first and foremost, regular meetings. This does not have to be, again, with 3 priests, I've had 3 different ways that we did this. Some priests are really scheduled and would like to have a set meeting that they know they're going to have every week. Some priests are like, I'll just come in anytime. It just depends on the person, but either way, agree on how you're going to have regular meetings and have them. And don't let anything get in the way of them, because it does matter that you are meeting weekly to discuss what's happening. What are the issues affecting both of us? For me, that was where I was able to sit down and talk about the things that were hard about what I was doing. I wanted my priest to know, if I was going to have to dismiss an employee, I wanted somebody to kind of walk through that with me and make sure I was making a good decision. And so those regularly scheduled meetings really did matter to me. And I think they're just great ways to communicate with each other. Communication, again, making sure that there are no surprises, making sure that I'm making you aware, priest, that, I've got a parishioner's family that's in the school, and we're having trouble with their kid, and their kid may withdraw and they're upset. The priest needs to know that. The priest one of the things that has always been helpful to me is when the priest is always going to hear something. There were always people that felt like rather than come and talk to me, they would go and talk to the priest. And I was blessed to have 3 priests who said, that's really not my department. You need to go talk to Mary Catherine. But they would also give me a heads up. And that was really helpful. Because I'd rather have that than no surprises. David, did you want to touch on that?
Are you ready for another good question?
I am.
Should the head of school attend the church staff meeting weekly?
I think it's a great idea.
Hang on 1 second. To clarify, we have a weekly staff meeting. The head of school is always invited. She does not attend. Should I urge them to attend?
I would, yes. I think the head of school needs to attend the church staff meeting every week. Now, I didn't always stay for all of it. If they begin to get into the weeds about a church event or something that and I needed to go, then I would say, hey, are y'all done with me? Can I go? But it was absolutely critical for me to be at that staff meeting. So yes, in my opinion, the head of school should attend that.
And I don't know, I think I'm split. I'm not sure. Where I'm going back and forth on that is, I think that it's important that there's communication going back and forth. The one thing that's a little bit of a challenge is the head of school is not on the rector's staff.
True.
And so
That's
I
right.
just think that, yeah, maybe you clarify that by going there for certain parts and excusing yourself when they get into more of the church staff meeting.
Right.
That's the only thing that's kind of coming up in the back of my mind is, from a pure black and white perspective, the head of school, based on our understanding of governance, is not on the rector's staff. Generally, the staff meeting is the rector's staff. So that's the only
Right.
reason why I'm going back and forth, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
long as there's clarification on the roles, then I don't think it's a problem. But I do think it's important to draw that distinction, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And I think, again, I think that a little bit of this has to do with kind of the nature of the relationship of the church and school. At St.
Probably.
Albans, my experience at St. Albans is that the church and school is super close, and the role, there was never a question that whether I worked for the church or not. It was clear I didn't. So it was easy for me to do that, and I wanted to do that. But I could see what you're saying, and I do think that that's a great point. So the question, I guess, answered is yes and maybe. And you have to just kind of see in the culture of the school. But would it be good for them to attend fairly regularly, just in terms of building relationship and being in community? I think so. But
and I think I would, and to clarify, I think I would ask for a response to this question. What's the goal of having the head of school attend the staff meeting? If the goal of having the head of school attend the staff meeting is the free flow of information, well, then I feel one way. If the goal of having the head of school attend the staff meeting is to give specific direction or guidance, then
Right.
I'm not sure. Does that make sense? So I guess that's the tension I'm feeling. Is part of the answer to that question is, if you want the head of school there, what are you trying to accomplish? Clarify what you're trying to accomplish, and then answer the question, is what I'm trying to accomplish best achieved by having the head of school at the staff meeting? If the answer is yes, then I think it's probably okay.
Right.
If the answer is to muddy the lines or to give more direction, then I don't know if the staff meeting is the appropriate place for that, because the line of communication for the head of school is the board, not the rector, if that makes sense. So
Right.
I may be overanalyzing a little bit, but I think that's a great question that may push back. We're getting a comment. My response would be the head of school could have input into the calendar of the church as it relates to school activities, and then open up communication to all the staff. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, particularly in a shared space, I mean, where do things go really, really wrong in a shared space? The calendar.
Typically share. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the motivation. So I think that makes sense. Making sure there's free flow of information. Depending on how the office is set up, the church office may get lots of inquiries about school type activities and questions. Right. So yeah, that makes all the sense to me. That makes a lot of sense to me. If the reason for having the head of school there is to give direction, then I'm not sure. But yeah, the way Michael's kind of framed that question out, I think that probably does make sense. Although I do think it's important that everyone understand the head of school is there not as a member of the rector's staff, but as the head of the school, the outreach ministry of the church.
Yeah, and our church staff meetings were almost always primarily calendaring and communication. So I think if that's the purpose of your meetings, then sure. And there were times that I called and said, I can't come, I'm busy. And, that was fine. So yeah, I think those are great points. Last two best practices are just, supporting the rector's support of the head is so critical, and just good habits of communication, collaboration, helpfulness, just being a support to the head is really important. And then engagement, again, one of the things that I hear from heads all the time is, my rector is not engaged. They won't come down. They won't be a part of the school. They won't. And I hear that some, and it does make me sad, because that's, in order to have a relationship, you got to be involved. So my last slide really to kind of wrap up is just the idea of how do we really support the head of school as a rector? It's just some thoughts that I have, some things that really mattered to me when I was in my job. And the first one is to take the time to know the major day-to-day things that are happening. I'm not expecting a rector to know, every little detail. By no means is that what I'm talking about, but to know if I had a rector who knew that I was really struggling with the renewal of a teacher or a non-renewal of a teacher, and what I was doing to try to coach that teacher either out or coach them up to try to get them to do what I needed them to do, that those kinds of issues matter. Enrollment issues, big picture issues. There were things that my rector knew that my board didn't know because they were things that I was struggling with. And so taking the time to know those major day-to-day issues is really helpful. Encourage the head of school to take vacation days. I can tell you that the only person on my campus that I felt really like who really could give me the permission, and it really wasn't their role to give me the permission, but it just felt like that if my priest said, you need to take a day off, that I could do that. Because everybody else I felt like was on my shoulders and I was carrying the load, and no one else would ever actually have told me to take the day off. But it was always nice to have my rector recognize when I was struggling and in a stressful situation, and have you taken care of yourself? Encouraging them to have self-care is important. Making sure the head of school, again, knows that you're not going to triangulate, that you're going to be supportive, but that y'all are going to have direct and honest conversation. I think that's important. Praying for and praying with the head of school, I think is an incredibly supportive way to offer support and encouragement. And then to remember that it's a pretty lonely job. I used to laugh and say that, the rector comes in and all the parishioners love him or her, and they love their sermons, and they give them their beach condos on the island. And I can't think of a time that any parent ever gave me their beach condo on the island. So it is a different role that the rector plays in the community. And remembering that, and remembering that the head of school's job can be pretty lonely, you have a unique opportunity to encourage and care for them in a way that no one else does. So those are my thoughts about supporting the head of school. That's kind of the end. We're at the questions section.
Another great question.
I'm still not able to see, but I can answer.
We can see you. Another great question. Before we end today, can you address the Holy Eucharist within the school chapel environment? As the Holy Eucharist is so important to our Episcopal identity, it seems important to me as rector that we offer Eucharist to the school and the staff. So I served in a school where we had daily noonday prayer, and then once a week we had Eucharist on all the divisions, pre-K through 12. So that question resonates with me. I don't think that's the norm in a lot of Episcopal schools. So I think we have to start by saying we need to be aware of the context that we're in. If you are in a school where a weekly Eucharist is part of the tradition, then I would absolutely recommend that you preserve that. If you are in a community where Eucharist is not part of the tradition, then yeah, I think it makes sense to ask that question. Why do we not do some type of celebration of the Eucharist? For a lot of places, weekly is probably too much. That made sense for the environment where I serve. I know some schools do a Eucharist quarterly. Some schools do an opening Eucharist and an ending Eucharist at the start and at the end of the year. My personal bias is that it needs to be more frequent than that, just because I think from a formation perspective, it's absolutely critical. Issues that come to the surface immediately are the vast majority of your population of school are not Episcopalian. So questions that you have to approach are, how do we handle distribution of communion? So, how do we make it comfortable for kids that want to receive communion, but also recognizing that not every student is going to receive communion. So one way to explore that would be that everyone comes up to the rail at the appropriate time, but that the kids are, perfectly positioned to either decide to receive communion or receive a blessing. In the community where I served, we had everyone come up to the communion rail because we didn't want anyone to be excluded. Now, whether or not they received bread, wine, blessing, whatever, that was the student's decision, and the student and the parents would talk that out, and then the individual student made that call. But everyone came up because we didn't want kiddos to be excluded by some coming up, some not coming up. So those kinds of conversations come up as well. Mary Catherine, I can't remember the tradition at St. Albans. I think y'all did have a weekly Eucharist.
We actually did not for a long time, and we did do it when John and Sarah came. We started doing it my last year, and we did it once a semester, and it was great. And I 100% agree that that it's appropriate for the rector to ask the question, if we're not doing it, why aren't we doing it? And I think when you do that, sometimes it's just a matter of, gosh, the logistics of doing it is a little frightening. We had toddlers through 6th grade, so a good portion of our constituency, our school constituency, was young children. But we just had to figure it out, and we did do it. And so I think I agree that if it's not being done, that a question needs to be asked. And even if all you do is begin to do it once a semester until you can build it into your culture. Yeah, absolutely.
The participant who posed the question is saying we absolutely emphasize the blessing is significant, is as significant as the host, and we plan to offer Holy Eucharist once a month. So yeah, that's kind of a way to tiptoe into that. I would say be very intentional about the communication plan to the parents if you have not been offering Eucharist, and then also be aware that, as with any significant change to the schedule, this is going to be very anxiety provoking to faculty.
Yes.
And try to recognize that anxiety probably comes as much, if not more, from a disruption in the normal schedule, as opposed to anything, pointed towards Episcopal identity or the Eucharist.
Right.
So just be intentional about that. But if it's something that you're already doing, then I commend you on that. Let us know if you hit any bumps in the road. We can talk. If it's something you're contemplating to launch, reach out if we can be of assistance as well. But I think that's a really critical conversation to have, because of the cornerstone of the 79 prayer book is that Eucharist that's how we generally come together as a church community. So it's up to all of us as school leaders to pose the question, what does that look like for an Episcopal school that's physically not together on Sunday? So does that mean we don't do it? Or do we say this is so central to what it means to be part of the Episcopalian family that we are going to figure out how to make it work in the school? So it's a great question, and just be aware that it's a very weighty one, that slow, intentional conversations are going to be critical.
Right.
Okay.
So, anything else?
Any other questions? I think that's it, gang. So Mary Catherine and I will hang around for a few more minutes if there are any other questions. But otherwise, Mary Catherine, thank you so much.
One thing I do want to do, I want to push. This is a shameless plug, but we're going to be offering a church school relationship offering at Biennial. And so if any of you are coming to the Biennial conference, Scott Brown and I are going to be collaborating on a church school relationship session. And we're going to maybe go into a little bit more of what we've talked about today, and so maybe a few more anecdotes, and be able to answer more questions. So if you want to come to that, we'd love to have you.
And registration for Biennial is live right now on our website.
Right.
Go to swaes.org. Under events, there's a tab for Biennial Conference, and we'd love to see you there. And there's going to be lots of great workshops specifically on church school relations.
Right.
Okay. Thank you all so much for participating, and don't hesitate to reach out if we can be of assistance. Mary Catherine,
Bye,
thank you so
everyone.
much.
Thank y'all.